my father's family was more in Ireland. My mother's family was French Canadian, so they were more from there. So, my parents. My mother went to Marygrove College. She was the first person in her family to get a college degree. A couple of other brothers and sisters, her brothers did afterwards. I don't know. That may not be 100% accurate. Anyway, she was a college graduate. My dad went to studied at U of D. But in 1937, coming sort of in the consequences of the Depression, my dad was kind of an activist. He formed the Detroit Catholic Worker Houses of Hospitality. The Catholic Worker was and is today even a national movement where it's rooted in the progressive forms of Catholicism. The headquarters for the Catholic Worker is in New York City. The founders were Dorothy Day and Peter Morin, and basically the Catholic Worker is a movement that says that you have a house of hospitality where you serve the corporal and spiritual needs of people, emulating the corporal and spiritual works of mercy that are bedrock Catholic theory. So for my dad and mom, this meant creating these two houses of hospitality: St. Francis House, which was a house where men who had no place to live could stay, where every day, 365 days a year, there was a soup kitchen. And then St. Martha House of Hospitality is a house where our family lived and where women and children who didn't have places to stay stayed with us. My parents lived initially a life of voluntary poverty. We lived on the donations that came to the Catholic Worker, and basically were a presence to respond to the needs of people who lived in the neighborhood or who came looking for help. So I grew up in this socially conscious family background, which as I came of age in the 60s certainly stood me in good stead with the beginnings of the emergence of the more public period of the civil rights movement, and it led me to a grassroots activism. My parents were part of the initial group that founded the West Central organization, which was on the west side here, one of the early self-determination grassroots organizations in the city that basically WCO confronted City Hall about the disproportionate allocation of resources for people in what was then the inner city. As you know, in that era, there was this line of demarcation. All people of color and all poor people, including poor white people, all lived in the inner city, and that was differentiated from the outer city, and that boundary was East and West Grand Boulevard. So when you crossed the boulevard, you knew that you had left the inner city. And the inner city is where, as I say, people of color were primarily, not exclusively, but primarily able to live. And anybody who was poor was also the area that was shared space with the centers of commerce downtown, because downtown was still a viable location. And so that was and so that was one of my early forms of involvement at WCO, doing voter registration drives. My father was a conscientious objector to World War II. He would not carry a gun. He was a pacifist. So I know he was ordered to the front by the then Catholic cardinal for the diocese, and his thing was, I'm not carrying a gun. What he did do was become an ambulance driver, and drove an ambulance associated with the British 8th Army and the American Friends Services Committee through North Africa and Egypt for his military in lieu of military service, because he would not carry a gun. And that was pretty unorthodox.
We definitely have to go into that, especially in that era. I mean, even to today, as people talk about the the gun debate, but like, a lot of men, masculinity, machismo, we define ourselves, especially in that area, by carrying a gun. As my grandfather fought in World War II. This house we're sitting in was bought with the GI Bill from World War II. Mm-hmm. So, what was he reading? What led him even to that?
Well, this was Catholic worker philosophy, and this was that and they were the Catholic worker movement was very much influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and this notion of civil disobedience. In New York City, this was in the era in the 1940s and 50s. There was this this like, we're going to build bomb shelters, and this is going to protect people from the atom bomb. And so there would be these, in that era, air raid drills where people were supposed to, when you heard the drill, run down to the subway, and the leaders of the Catholic worker would go sit in Central Park, because their thing was, one, violence is no solution, and two, there's no way you're going to escape the consequences of an atom bomb by hiding in a basement.
I definitely had this question. Just my mind is like, I'm so intrigued by your dad now. Twitter wasn't around, Google wasn't around. You talk about Gandhi, like that was happening like right then. How was he even getting this information? Like, how was this?
Well, there was an there were many really important journals and newspapers. The Catholic Worker had its own newspaper called the Catholic Worker. That was a penny a copy. It's still today a penny a copy.
Seriously?
Yeah.
I may need to get a Catholic Worker.
Right. And there was there were magazines like Dissent. Magazines like Commonweal, that for people who were in sort of the Catholic progressive intelligentsia. So you went to programs where there would be people making speeches, carrying on this vibrant intellectual tradition. So it was very influential in his life, and he and my mother both were very influential in
your life,
in my life, in giving me a clear sense of the importance of being authentic and speaking your truth, and being prepared to speak your truth, whether it's popular or unpopular.
But I definitely have to talk about just that danger of your father taking stances like that, because at the time the fight against red was strong in our nation.
And the Catholic Worker were seen as sort of
a communist
pink
type thinking.
Yes, pink. Was it pink organizations? You're not really red. You're pink.
But you're leaning.
You're leaning in that direction. So people like myself would be referred to as red diaper babies, children born to parents who had levels of activism in the 40s and 50s.
And he didn't fear any of this. Is like
I don't know that he did, but I mean, I grew up knowing that if you believed it, you said it, and you stood by it, and you dealt with whatever the consequences were, but you did not keep your mouth shut.
Black revolutionaries, distillery owners, Italian fashion retailers, and Motown Grammy winners all share their best stories never before told in any other media outlets on Detroit is Different. Visit DetroitisDifferent.com or download the Detroit is Different app on Apple's App Store or Google's Play Store.